Jai Hind, Namaste, hello and a very warm welcome to UPSC for everyone. My name is Abhinav and in this video we'll be discussing selected topics from the Hindu and Indian Express. Now we will be covering both the newspapers in a hybrid style. Some articles I will be telling you from my notes, others I will be directly reading from the paper. And you can also get PDFs for these papers on my Telegram channel. The link is available in the description section, right? Now we'll begin with the Hindu and then we'll graduate to the Express. And for your convenience, I'll also be adding timestamps in the description. So please subscribe to our channel if you like our videos. So without wasting much of time, let's get started. So starting with the Hindu, New Zealand PM Ardern wins historic re-election. Labour Party set to win 64 out of 120 seats. So let us look at this news. New Zealand PM Ardern wins historic re-election. Voters rewarded her for decisive response to COVID-19 pandemic. And she was also very decisive in dealing with the Christchurch tragedy where 2 mosques were attacked by a gunman. So in the aftermath of that tragedy, she immediately came out with stringent laws to check the semi-automatic weapons, and she beautifully handled the social fabric of New Zealand as well. And she was able to maintain peace among the communities. So Ms. Ardern promised supporters she would build an economy that works for everyone, create jobs, train people, protect the environment and address climate challenges and social inequalities. She was also praised for her handling of the last year's attack on 2 Christchurch mosques. Now the heavy mandate means that Ms. Ardern could form the first single party government in decades. She became a role model for working mothers around the world. She moved quickly to pass new laws banning the deadliest types of semi-automatic weapons after the Christchurch attacks. And in late March, only when about 100 people had tested positive for COVID-19, she and her health officials put New Zealand into a strict lockdown with a motto of go hard and go early. She shut the borders and outlined an ambitious goal of eliminating the virus entirely rather than just trying to control its spread. So this is her decisive leadership, and if you look at it, the countries which are headed by women leaders, they have fared better in terms of handling this COVID-19 pandemic, and that is a well-established fact by now. So this is about this news, and this news is important for your paper 2 international affairs. You could also apply this for paper 1 social issues, women empowerment and how women are doing so good in different fields around the world. Ensure speedy access to vaccine, PM Modi. Focus on cold storage chains, distribution network and monitoring mechanism. So here the only important part is we have already discussed the steps that we are going to take once the vaccine is available. So all the vaccine management steps, which include logistics, delivery and administration of vaccine, should be put in place rigorously, and it must include advanced planning of cold storage chains, distribution network, monitoring mechanism, advanced assessment and preparation of an ancillary equipment such as vials and syringes. If you remember, this is the plan that Government of India has formulated. There was a committee headed by Niti Aayog member, and that formulated a plan that once the vaccine becomes available, this is how we are going to ensure its delivery, and this is how we are going to monitor it to ensure that those who need it the first will get it first, right? So again, this is a sort of revision, and you can use this in paper 3, health management, and also for disaster management, because this pandemic is kind of a disaster only. So how to manage this is part of your paper 3, right? 76% of rural Indians can't afford nutritious diet. So this is for your paper 1 and paper 3. Let us see. 76% of rural Indians can't afford nutritious diet, according to a paper titled Affordability of Nutritious Diets in Rural India, recently published in journal Food Policy. Now, unlike the economic survey's Thalynomics, which provided a rosier picture of meal costs, this study uses the wages of unskilled workers who make up a larger proportion of population than industrial workers. So at this point, first let me tell you what is Thalynomics. Basically, the survey came out with a concept called Thalynomics, that what it costs to have a thali or a proper meal, and it was based for both vegetarian and non-vegetarian meals. But that was only for the skilled workers. But this report is covering the unskilled worker, which are of course in a greater number than the skilled workers in our country, right? So Thalynomics is the economics of a plate of food in India, is an attempt to figure out how much a meal costs in India. The price of a meal, both vegetarian and non-vegetarian, is modeled for 25 states and UTs. taking into account the price of cereals, vegetables, pulses, and cost of fuel. So these were the parameters for which the cost of a thali or a meal was calculated under Thalinomics. But then again, it only covered workers working in factories or in the formal sector, but the unskilled workers, they are in a greater number. So this report is studying them. Now this study includes items such as dairy, fruit, dark green leafy vegetables that are essential as per India's official dietary guidelines. Now these guidelines are issued by National Institute for Nutrition, and the daily needs for an adult woman to eat are as follows: 330 gram of cereal, 75 gram of pulses, and so on. Now coming to cost per meal, selecting the cheapest options from actual Indian diets: wheat, rice, bajra, milk, curd, onions, radish, spinach, bananas, the things we consume and the things that are easily available. The study calculated that a day's meals would cost rupees 45 for an adult woman and rupees 51 for an adult man. Now the report says that even if they spent all their income on food, 63.3% of the rural population, or more than 52 crore Indians, would not be able to afford that nutritious meal. And if they set aside just a third of their income for non-food expenses, 76% of rural Indians would not be able to afford the recommended diet. So this is as per the data that is provided by Government of India only. But the report says that these whole figures are speculative to an extent, but they paint a larger picture that having nutritious meal is still very costly, especially in rural India. Dr. Reddy's gets nod for Sputnik V trials. So from the Drugs Controller General of India, I have told you CDCSO and then DCGI. This is the mechanism, we've discussed it. I'm not getting into it again. To conduct the adaptive phase 2-3 human clinical trials for Sputnik V vaccine in India. It is the world's first registered vaccine against COVID-19, and it got registration license from the Russian authorities in August only. This will be a multi-center randomized control study which will include safety and immunogenicity study. Now this vaccine is developed by Gamaleya National Research Institute of Epidemiology and Microbiology, Russia. It is based on human adenoviral vectors platform. So this is all that you need to know about this. A zero Rajdhani skirts Guwahati, cuts travel short. So basically this is a train. Its number is 02505. So 0, if any train's number starts from 0, that means it is a temporary route, but this is now converted into a full-fledged route. So that is why it is called Zero Rajdhani. And one more thing, Rajdhani basically covers the major city centers, but this one will be skipping Guwahati. So that is why it is a special train called the Zero Rajdhani, right? There are other types of trains as well, as much as 29 types of trains that are run by Indian Railways. So it is not possible to discuss each and every one of them here. So let us see what this news is saying. Dibrugarh train via Bogibeel, India's iconic rail road bridge, saves 117 km from regular route to Delhi. A Zero Rajdhani train via this 4.94 km bridge has now brought the people of the two banks closer to New Delhi by more than 100 kilometers. The 02505. So this number is for temporary, but now it has been converted into more of a permanent sort of route. Between New Delhi and Dibrugarh on October 12 was technically not a Rajdhani, whose train number starts with 2, while those of Mail Express trains start with 1. The 0 makes it a special train, usually operated temporarily. The special Rajdhani could be first deviating from train definition, bypassing Guwahati, the original terminals for Rajdhani, by some 50 kilometers. For people in Dibrugarh and eastern Arunachal Pradesh, what matters more is the option of reaching Delhi or other stations on the normal Rajdhani route faster. The track via Bogibeel is 117 kilometers shorter. So this is all about this news that you need to know, and this also acts as a gateway to Arunachal Pradesh, right? Now on page 5, Odisha villagers create river mouth. This you can use in paper 2 for governance and people's initiatives. So people were asking the state administration to help them, but they got no response. So they took matters in their own hands and they were able to do it. So let us see. Hundreds of fishermen have come together to excavate a new river mouth to prevent their village from being inundated by Rishikulya river in Odisha's Ganjam district. Now, what is the mouth of a river? When the river meets the ocean or sea, that part is called the mouth of the river, right? From where it originates is known as source, and where it meets the sea or ocean, or where it ends is known as the mouth of the river, right? See, this river was supposed to meet the sea, but there were some obstructions. So what would happen? The adjoining areas would get flooded and there were problems of waterlogging. So they used their own resources, money and implements, and they volunteered their own labor and they created a new mouth to solve their own problem. As the natural river mouth got choked, the seaside villages faced deluge due to overtopping of water. The fishermen were also facing problems of docking their fishing boats along the beach, which was witnessing steady erosion. They wanted a secure area for boat anchorage. Then for 3 days, people came with their own implements to dig a channel from the river to Bay of Bengal. They also pooled money to hire an earth mover so sand dunes could be moved at a faster pace. So this is a very beautiful example. When the administration does not help and when people are really wanting something, they can initiate changes on their own end. Then amended law omits pay for J&K sarpanches. Remuneration will continue official. So I have collated this article from two sources, Hindu and Indian Express. So let us see. The Union Home Ministry has annulled the Jammu and Kashmir Panchayat Raj Act 1989. Now section 10 of the act provided remuneration to sarpanch and panches, and they were entitled to a monthly honorarium which was to be specified by the state. That has been omitted. Currently, the sarpanch and panch were getting 3,000 and rupees 1,000 per month respectively. Now, government is saying that the omission would not affect the remuneration and the panches would continue to get paid. Other provisions being, a Halka Panchayat shall be required to get its account audited by a chartered accountant every year. Halka means an area comprising a village or a contiguous number of villages determined by the government, right? Now, the important part of this news also paves the way for creation of district development councils in the union territory, the members of which will be directly elected by voters in the union territory. The DDCs will have jurisdiction over an entire district, excluding those areas that are designated as municipality or municipal corporation. So except for these areas, the DDC will have the jurisdiction. Now, each district will be cut into 14 territorial constituencies, and then there would be elections for those constituencies. And among the elected members, they will also choose their chairman and deputy chairman. And they will have their own fund comprising of grants and own resources, some local taxes and other charges that can be levied by them. So DDCs will comprise elected representatives from 14 territorial constituencies to be identified in each district. It will have the jurisdiction over the entire district, excluding parts under the municipal corporation. Each will have fund comprising grants and its own resources. The block development councils will function under the DDC. Now each district will be divided into 14 territorial constituencies for which elections will be held, and the winners will elect a chairperson and vice chairpersons from amongst themselves. The council will replace the district development boards, which earlier, when J&K was a state, were chaired by cabinet minister or a minister of state and included MLAs, MLCs and members of parliament. Focus on individual manipulators, BARC, committed to generating scientific data, says council. So BARC has said that its effort on combating infiltration were focused on individuals responsible for manipulating the TRP system. That is all from this news. Then another small news, Mumbai airport offers express RT-PCR tests for passengers. If negative, they can skip institutional quarantine at destination. Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj International Airport has introduced express COVID-19 RT-PCR reverse transcript polymerase chain reaction test facility for all passengers departing from the airport. It is also available for non-passengers visiting the airport to drop off or collect their loved ones. So earlier it was only for the arriving passengers. Now it is also for the passengers who are departing. So if they get the test and they come out negative, so they don't have to follow the quarantine procedures at their destination because they have this certificate. So that is the advantage of this certification. Then Jacinda Ardern promises to govern for all New Zealanders. We have already covered the important part of this news, right? So you can read the rest on your own. Again, thousands of protesters hit the streets across Thailand. They defy government ban on gatherings for third consecutive day. So we have discussed in detail the Thailand problem the day before yesterday in a video. So you can go back to that video and you can refer to it. Nothing new here. Then small news, China outlaws insulting national flag. So the Standing Committee of China's Congress passed amendments to a law that will criminalize the intentional insulting of national flag and emblem after anti-government protesters in Hong Kong last year desecrated the Chinese flag. So this is all from this. Then UK EU set to discuss structure of Brexit talks. So I am not getting into Brexit because this will happen real time soon. So whatever will happen, then we'll discuss the whole issue. No point of discussing it every other day. Then another small news, apparel exports on path to a V-shaped recovery. So we are seeing the green offshoots in economy again. So 90% fall in April to 10% rise in September. So this is a V-shaped recovery. It looks like this. For example, this is your recovery and this is time. So, or the growth and this is time. So what happens? First it hit rock bottom and now it is recovering. So this is the V-shaped recovery. Then another small news, Paytm top up via credit card attracts 2% fees. So earlier, if you were to recharge your Paytm more than 10,000 rupees, then you had to pay 2% fees. Now for any transaction, you'll have to pay 2% fee if you recharge your Paytm account using credit card. Then sweet and salt in blood. Interesting news. Let us see. So researchers have for the first time found that female mosquitoes have individual neurons that sense human blood's distinctive flavor. The sense of taste is specially tuned to detect a combination of at least 4 different substances in blood: glucose, sodium chloride, that is common salt, sodium bicarbonate, and ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So at least these 4 substances, it can taste in your blood. The researchers found that female Aedes aegypti mosquitoes possess different neurons in the syringe-like stylet. This is known as the stylet, which punctures the skin to distinguish blood from nectar. So basically what happens, to survive and for metabolic functions, the mosquito depends on the nectar from the plants, but for producing eggs, this female mosquito depends on blood. So only for production of eggs, it needs blood, but for metabolic function, it needs the plant nectar. Reinventing auctions for the real world. So this is again about the Nobel Prize in Economics that went to 2 American economists, Robert Wilson and Paul Milgram, right? This article or this explainer has simplified their contributions. So let us look at them once again. This is important for your paper 3 economics, and it could also come in your PT examination. So what is auction theory? It is a branch of economics which deals with auctions. Now auctions are important to economists. Why? Because see, resources are limited, but our needs and demands are unlimited. So who gets what? So to determine that, there is a method of auction that only those who are ready to pay the highest price or the highest bidder should be able to get access to those resources. That is the basic principle behind this theory. This is the most widely used and most efficient mechanism to allocate scarce resources, limited supply of resources, and unlimited human needs. Hence, they need to be allocated only to the most urgent needs of the society. In particular, auction theory deals with various ways in which auctions can be designed to improve seller revenues or increase benefits to consumer, or even achieve both at the same time. So in a normal auction, what happens? There is a seller and there is a buyer, no middleman, direct contact between the two. So earlier theories would say that 2% zero sum game, one would gain at the cost of others. But this auction theory says that it could be that one of them gains, or it could also be the case that both of them gain. Now, how is this relevant? Auction are the most common tool for thousands of years used by societies to allocate scarce resources. It helps sellers discover those buyers who value the goods the most. So this is also true in your normal life as well. If you would want to sell off something, you would want to sell it off to the highest bidder who wants it more, right? So that is what this auction theory is all about. Further, selling goods to the highest bidder also helps the seller maximize his or her revenues. So both buyers and sellers benefit from auction. How does the seller benefit? He gets the highest price. How does the buyer benefit? That amongst the many buyers, this buyer is able to buy that commodity or service. Now, what are its applications? To understand the applications, we must first address the criticism of auctions. And auctions are criticized on mainly 2 grounds. If you remember, I have discussed winner's curse with you. So number 1 is winner's curse only. So winner's curse. Now this was based on a study that showed how buyers who overpaid for US oil lease in the 1970s earned low returns. And Dr. Wilson was the first to study this matter. If you remember, I showed you that cat picture. Let me show it again. So now this is winner's curse. Again, for example, this is an auction for fish, right? There are many bidders. Some are over optimistic, so they will bid for more. Others are rational player, so they will bid for less of the value. But if you take the average of all these values, it would always be near to the actual value of that commodity. See, this is estimate, this is mean value, and this is the real value. So these are the optimists who are bidding more, and these are the rationalists who are bidding less. They are trying to minimize their loss, and they are trying their best to get this product. So what happens, even if this optimist wins this bid, he has actually lost out because he has spent so much more than the real value of that product. So that is known as the winner's curse. He found that rational bidders may decide to underpay for resources in order to avoid the winner's curse, and argued that sellers can get better bids for their goods if they share more information about it with potential buyers. So it can balance both the parties, the interest of the seller and the interest of the buyer. Dr. Milgrom added further nuance to this analysis by arguing that individual bidders may still submit vastly different bids due to their unique circumstances. So Dr. Milgrom said that, okay, this is okay, but then there are some different circumstances. For example, he gives an example of an oil company, a company that can manage to sell oil at a higher price or process it at a lower cost would be more willing to pay more for that crude oil. So this is just one of the examples. So unique circumstances for everybody, right? Everybody in themselves is a rational actor, and they are all trying to maximize their gains. So this winner's curse is not entirely true. That is what they proved. Then the other criticism was revenue equivalence theorem, which said no matter which model of auction you undertake, the overall value would be the same. In effect, auction format did not matter. But then Dr. Milgrom showed that auction format can actually have a huge impact on the revenues earned by sellers. Now he compared two models, Dutch auction and English auction. If you must have seen in movies that English auction is common, that we see that bidding starts say from a reserve price, then there would be a competition who is willing to pay more, right? That is the English auction. The Dutch auction is just the opposite. The auctioneer lowers the price. That means he starts the bid from a very high price. For example, he would say that I am ready to sell this commodity for $1 billion. Now nobody would give a response. Then he'll come down, then come down, then come down. Then he'll see at what cost buyers are ready to buy that commodity. So Dr. Milgrom showed that Dutch auctions, in which auctioneer lowers the price of the product until a buyer bids for it, can help sellers earn more revenues than English auctions. See, this might beat your common sense, but Dr. Milgrom showed that Dutch auctions yield better returns for seller than the English auction. In case of English auctions, the price rises based on higher bids submitted by competing buyers. But as soon as some of the bidders drop out of the auction as the price rises, the remaining bidders become more cautious about the bidding higher prices. So this is the shortcoming of English auction. So what they did, number one, they proved that winner's curse is not always right. And number two, they proved that the revenue equivalence theorem is not always true, right? But apart from that, they also gave their new models and formats for auctions. So Dr. Milgrom and Dr. Wilson, however, are most popular for their contribution towards devising new real-world auction formats. Their auction format is known as the combinatorial auctions. Designed by the DO, for instance, have been used to sell complex goods such as spectrum as bundles instead of individual units. So what used to happen earlier, that government would sell spectrum rights on a piecemeal basis. So that made it very unappealing for companies. So private speculators, they took advantage of it. They bought these piecemeal spectrums and then they combined them into a bundle, and then they would sell it to the companies and they would earn billions of dollars. So in this process, government would lose out on its revenue, and also the companies who are ultimately buying the spectrum, they would have to pay much more, and who would be earning a profit? Only the private speculator. So to combat this, they gave their combinatorial auction. So models like these that they gave help both the buyers and the sellers, and that is why they have got the Nobel Prize. Now, how do these contributions matter? The contributions of Dr. Milgrom and Dr. Wilson have helped governments and private companies design their auctions better. So instead of a win-loss game, it has become a win-win scenario. This has in turn helped in better allocation of scarce resources and offered more incentives for sellers to produce complex goods. Now, there is also criticism of their model. Not all economists necessarily agree with the popular use of Dr. Milgram and Dr. Wilson's work on the winner's curse to take a dim view of auctions. They argue that while enthusiastic bidding may lower the returns earned by companies, this will not necessarily lead to higher prices for consumers as is commonly believed. For example, if you look at India, telecom companies, they bid very high for the spectrum, but if you look at the data and calling costs, they are the lowest in the world. So that is what they are trying to say. This is because in any competitive market, pricing of consumer goods is based on what the markets will bear rather than on sunk costs. So this is what is happening. That is why you see companies like Vodafone and Idea had to come together, because they could not sustain themselves in the market because of the high prices that they paid, but the lower revenue that they are getting. Further, persistent overbidding is unlikely as financial losses weed out inefficient speculators over time. So this is about their model and criticisms to their model. Jagan versus judges. So the Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh, he has made complaint about the Supreme Court judge N.V. Ramana. I'm not getting into the allegations because this is sub judice and this is a political matter, right? So we'll just see in this that how are allegations of misconduct against judges inquired into. So how are the allegations of misconduct against judges dealt with? The Supreme Court protects the independence of judges of High Court and Supreme Court by making them removable only through a long process of impeachment under Article 124. Now this is very important article, and the process of impeachment is very, very complex. It requires, first of all, initiation of a process by at least 50 MPs. Then it has to be passed in both the houses of the parliament through a special majority, 2/3 of the member present and voting, right? So it is a very complex procedure, and in between there's also an inquiry committee, right? This is to ensure that the judiciary is independent. That means that it cannot be arbitrarily removed by the government. So they have high independence in terms of security of their tenure. However, not all forms of misconduct will warrant impeachment. There could be other kinds of impropriety too. For example, the case that we are discussing. There are times when serious complaints of this sort are received and the Chief Justice of India is called upon to examine them. Since 1997, judges have adopted an in-house procedure for inquiring into such charges. Basically, there were a series of cases that culminated in the 3 judges case, and since then it has become an in-house procedure. So how does the in-house procedure work? So number one, what happens? That the Chief Justice receives the complaint and decides whether to act on it or not. So when a complaint is received against a High Court judge, the Chief Justice of India should decide if it is considered frivolous or if it is directly related to the merits of a substantive decision in a judicial matter, or it does not involve any serious misconduct or impropriety. So number one is decision at the end of Chief Justice of India, and it is his discretion to go ahead with it or cancel the complaint at the first stage only. Then comes judge's response. If the Chief Justice thinks that the problem is serious or the allegation is serious, then he seeks the response from the concerned judge. So if it's serious, the Chief Justice of India should get the judge's response. He may close the matter if he is satisfied with the response. If a deeper probe is considered necessary, both the complaint and the judge's response along with Chief Justice comments are recorded for further action. The same procedure holds good if the CJI receives a complaint directly. So see, Chief Justice of India, he has high discretion at both the stages. Number one, when he receives the complaint, it is up to him to decide whether it is serious enough or just frivolous. Number two, and if he is satisfied with the judge's response, then he'll close it. If not, then he'll record the judge's statement, his own consideration and the complaint, and then he'll take further action, right? Now further action means constituting a 3-member committee. So after considering the High Court's Chief Justice, the judge involved and the complaint, the Chief Justice, if deemed necessary, forms a 3-member committee. The committee should have 2 Chief Justices from other High Courts and 1 High Court judge. The inquiry it holds is of the nature of a fact-finding mission and is not a formal judicial inquiry involving examination of witnesses. So there is no examination of witnesses here. The judge concerned is entitled to appear before it. If the case is against the High Court's Chief Justice, the same procedure is followed, but the probe committee comprises a Supreme Court judge and 2 Chief Justices of the High Courts. If a Supreme Court judge faces such a charge, the in-house panel will comprise the 3 Supreme Court judges. The in-house procedure does not give any separate provision to deal with complaint against the Chief Justice of India. So see, now there is a problem because Chief Justice of India is the one who receives the complaint. So he has a high discretion. So there could be a case where he could just dismiss the complaint on his own against himself. But in practice, a panel of 3 Supreme Court justices is formed. Now this whole inquiry is done under the Judges Inquiry Act. Okay. Now what happens after the probe is done? If the committee finds substance in the charges, it can give 2 kinds of recommendation. One, that the misconduct is serious enough to require removal from office, or that it is not serious enough to warrant removal. If the former case, the judge concerned will be urged to resign or seek voluntary retirement. If the judge is unwilling to quit, the Chief Justice of High Court concerned would be asked to withdraw the judicial work from him. The President and the Prime Minister will be informed of this situation. This is expected to clear the way for the Parliament to begin the process of impeachment under Article 124. If the misconduct does not warrant removal, the judge would be advised accordingly. So what happens? 3 stage. Number 1, Chief Justice of India, he receives complaint. He decides whether the complaint is serious or frivolous. If he thinks it is serious, then in stage 2, he asks for the opinion of the judge against whom the complaint is filed. If he is satisfied with the judge's response, then no action. If he is not, then he records the complaint, the judge's statement, and then comes the stage 3 when a 3-member panel is formed. The 3-member panel, it conducts its own inquiry, and this whole procedure is done under Judges Inquiry Act, right? And after its inquiry, it submits a report to Chief Justice. Now, the report could have 2 suggestions. Number 1, the misconduct or impropriety was serious, so the judge should be removed. And number 2, it is not serious enough, so judge should be just warned or given some advice. So in first case, the first step would be that the Chief Justice would ask the Chief Justice of High Court to remove all the duties of that judge and ask him to resign or take voluntary retirement. If he does not, then the Chief Justice of India will ask the President and Prime Minister to initiate impeachment proceedings against that judge. So this is the whole procedure, Article 124 and Judges Inquiry Act, right? These are the things that you need to know. Now coming to Indian Express, we have already discussed this one. Here only the headline: PM learn from polls to prepare for vaccine delivery, says involved district officials, civil society organizations, volunteers, experts. So this is again a form of people's participation in this process. So you can add it to paper 3 and paper 2, governance and health management, and also disaster management. Then proposal to army to cut ceremonies, canteens for better use of resources. So there was a report and it said that army should cut down on these expenditures. Now this has sort of created a controversy. So I'll not get into it because there are so many suggestions. Just the headline would do. If you're interested, you could read this on your own. Now this is important. This is related to your paper 1 geography. Tectonic fault line that runs through Ladakh not inactive as was thought, moving north, says study. So this is about plate tectonics. Now if you're not aware of what plate tectonics is, it is going to be a very difficult thing for me to explain it here. Just for simply understanding, you should know that the Himalayas are called young fold mountains. Why? Because there are 2 plates that are colliding, the peninsular plate and the Eurasian plate, and because of that the mountains are rising. So if I go on explaining this, it will be a very, very long topic. So that is why I'm not touching it. Let's just see what this news is saying. A recent survey has found that the tectonic fault line that runs through Ladakh all along Indus River is not inactive as was previously thought and is in fact moving northward. This study was conducted by Wadia Institute of Himalayan Geology, Dehradun, and found that the fault line, the Indus Suture Zone, this is important name, Indus Suture Zone, is not logged and is tectonically active. See, we know the other parts of the Himalayas are tectonically active. This was supposed to be logged and not active, but now they are saying that even this part is active. While the frontal and central portions of Himalayas, the Shivaliks, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Jammu and Kashmir, and Sikkim are still known to be active and moving, the current understanding about Ladakh region is that it was locked. Their survey found that it is actually not the case and it is moving. Now, what is the suture zone? It is a linear belt of intense deformation where distinct terraces or tectonic units with different plate tectonic, metamorphic, and paleogeological histories joined together. I'll just show you a figure. Then again, it is complex thing. So that is why I'm not getting into it. See, this is the suture zone that they are talking about. These are the Himalayas. This is Tibet and then China. So what happens in suture zone? You see these arrows. So there is a possible partial meeting here, and because of that there is uplift and deformities in landforms. Now the study was conducted in Ladakh from the north of Ladakh's capital, and they are saying that a low intensity earthquake that happened in 2010 could also be attributed to this rupture. Rest is too technical, we'll not get into it. You just need to know that there is a fault line that runs through Ladakh and it is active as per the study of Wadia Institute of Himalayan Geology. Now the geologists observed that sedimentary beds in the area were tilted, the earth's crust broken, the rivers had uplifted terraces, and the bedrock showed brittle deformation that occurred at much shallower. So see, these are all the evidences that point to this process, the activation of fault lines. Depths. These geological features were then dated in laboratory at Dehradun, optically stimulated luminescence and data of seismicity and the rate of inundation or wearing down away of Earth's surface. From this, they found that this region has been neotectonically active for the past 78,000 to 58,000 years. So this area is active, but the level of activity is low. Now the new finding could have major implications for earthquake study and in understanding the seismic structure of the mountain. Despite the fault line, the threat of strong earthquake in Ladakh remained slim. They have not picked any intense seismic signature in the region. Now the implication of active tectonic plate went far beyond earthquakes, and that it could make the region vulnerable to erosion and landslides. So this is important because there is no vegetation in Ladakh. So the rock structure is weak. So there could be problems like flash flood and landslides. Fault lines weaken the rock formation in the region through which it runs, making an area vulnerable to excessive erosion and landslides. What makes the Ladakh region vulnerable is that unlike other areas in the Himalayas and the rest of the country, there is very little vegetation here and a very few trees that can root the soil down. So in case of a flash flood or cloud burst, this can have widespread impact. As a matter of fact, in 2010, Ladakh experienced a devastating flood because of this cloud burst, and with flood there was also landslide and huge loss was experienced in the region. So I'm sorry, this limitation of time does not allow me to totally explain to you what it is. For now, just know that it is a tectonic fault, runs through Ladakh, it is active, and though it is not that strong, it has implication on things like land deformities and landslides in the region. Then Forex reserves jumped $75 billion since lockdown. Now there are multiple reasons for that. Number one, strong FDI and FPI, right? So more foreign money is coming in. Then the demand for crude oil was low in the economy. So we did less of imports of crude oil. And for doing international trade, we have to pay in dollars or international currency, basket of currency. So that was not spent. So we got more dollars, but we spent less. And that is why our Forex reserves have jumped. And right now we are in a current account surplus rather than current account deficit. So let us see. As COVID-19 pandemic led to sharp decline in imports of crude oil and gold, and Indian companies attracted huge foreign direct investments, the Forex reserves swelled by 75 billion since lockdown announced in the last week of March. Now, one of the implications is that it is good because we have a cushion to actually support our imports for the next 1 year. So this huge influx of Forex is helping us. RBI data shows that FDI has stood strong despite the COVID-19, and the 5-month period between April and August, FDI amounted to 24.56 billion. Even FPI, see, now there is a simple demarcation. Foreign investment in any firm which is less than 10% of its share is FPI. More than 10%, it is known as FDI. Simple demarcation, no long term, short term, just this definition you need to know. Now, along with this jump in FDI and FPI inflows, the reserves have been supported by a dip in import bill on account of ruling low crude oil prices and decline in gold and other imports on account of COVID-19 pandemic. So what happened that our imports were reduced, but we got influx of forex money in terms of FDI and FPI. While the rising foreign exchange reserve provides cushion to the economy in terms of covering the import expenditure, it also provides stability to domestic currency against the dollar. So one more thing, number one, we can support our imports for the next 1 year, and number two, it also helps in stabilization of rupee vis-a-vis dollar. Economists say that the foreign exchange reserves in combination with benign oil prices and tepid imports leading to a current account surplus has helped the Indian rupee to remain broadly stable since mid-March 2020, despite deterioration in some of the other macro parameters such as retail inflation, fiscal deficit and negative GDP growth. Experts say that in times of dwindling economic activity and growth, the rising forex reserves provide a lot of strength as they now cover 1 year of import expenditure. India's foreign exchange reserve started rising significantly from September 2019. This is what it is. And one more point to add is, it is important to note that gold, which was a big import component for India, witnessed a sharp decline in quarter ended June following the skyrocketing prices. So, what are the implications? Number one, stability of rupee. And number two, you have cushion to basically support your imports for the next 1 year. Reasons being low demand in oil, low demand of gold, right? And great FDI and FPI coming into India. So that is why we are right now in current account surplus. Then dispute brewing over access to bands allowing high speed connectivity. Telcos, tech companies divided over spectrum. So a major fight is brewing between telecom operators, Bharti, Vodafone, Airtel, Reliance on one side, and technology players, Google, Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, etc. on the other, over the spectrum band that has the potential to provide high-speed broadband services, especially in remote areas and for better in-building coverage. Now, these companies say that it should be charged and government should go for auction, but the software giants are saying that it is against government's policy and it is also against international policies to go for auction for such bands of frequency. As a matter of fact, even the government stand since a very long time has been not to go for auction for this band. The issue has divided the two sides is whether spectrum in the band concerned should be delicensed or should be allocated through auctions, as in the case of access to service spectrum. So the service providers, they want auctions, and the software companies, they want delicensing. The spectrum concerned is the E and V bands, which are used as backhaul to connect mobile where fiber is not available. So what are the telecom companies saying? Now the telecom operators under the association COAI, they are saying that the band concerned should be auctioned, as not doing so would lead to a loss of revenue to the government because of these bands having very high commercial value proposition. Opposing their stand, the technology players, they also have an association, BIF, have contested COAI stand and written that spectrum should be delicensed and not auctioned, as it is not the same as spectrum for access service. BIF has pointed out that auctioning of spectrum in these bands, E and V bands, would go against international best practices. Now, sources in the Department of Telecommunications have thus far maintained that auction is ruled out, but so is administrative assignment. So it would be like first come, first serve basis. What's likely on the cards is a light touch license, but a final decision is awaited. Now, the argument against auction is on the premise that there's not much the government is going to get by doing so, unlike access spectrum. So that is why government is not interested in conducting auction. So another fight between Indian companies and these global giants. First we saw Paytm versus Google. Now these service providers versus these big software companies. So folks, that is all for this video. Thank you for watching. If you like our videos, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss out on any new videos that we post. Also, if you like our video, please give us a thumbs up. And please do connect with us on our Instagram page, UPSC for Everyone. So see you next time. Till then, stay happy, stay safe and have a great day. Namaste and Jai Hind.